Good afternoon to all and welcome to the 26th edition, actually, of the Kwame Ture Memorial Lecture Series. I'm your host, Asha Kambon, and we expect to have a very interesting discussion this afternoon. We're talking about the miseducation of the African child. And what brought us to that title and what brought us to that area of discussion. It's very interesting because when we launched the Kwame Ture Memorial Lecture Series on the 15th of June, our featured speaker, interestingly enough, that was Professor Louis R. Gordon. Professor Gordon said one of the interesting things he said when he spoke to the relevance of Frantz Fanon, who we were celebrating as this is his 100th anniversary of his birth. One of the interesting things he said was that the institutions of power in the Caribbean, they are still under colonial domination in the sense that we have not decolonized them. And he identified them as governance, religion, the education systems, and the architecture in the region. Interestingly, today we're talking about the education system. When we talk about the miseducation of the African child, we're going to explore that. And I also want to share with you something that was said also on that evening, which was so key to what we're talking about. And this was said by our colleague, Dr. Kayla Francis, who was representing the University of Trinidad and Tobago. And Kayla was making the point that when we are talking about social transformation of our societies and former colonies into independent nation states, she said one of the things, it requires, of course, education of our population. And she said has two difficult steps. One being ensuring access to the education. And the second, which in my humble opinion is the more challenging of the two, and that is dismantling what she called the grand narratives of colonial hegemony that underpin our notions of progress and development. And if we don't dismantle those notions, then we are struggling with our development. We are struggling with progress. And I think many of us would be able to agree that, in fact, there is something happening in our society when our young people seem not to be able to take advantage of what we think are opportunities in the society and find too many of them being lost to our society, whether lost through loss of life or lost through not being able to achieve their full potential. So here we are today. We're going to discuss this issue of the miseducation of the African child. And just to give you two more little hints as to where we're going with this discussion, one is that the title comes from the book by Carter G. Woodson, one of our greatest educators. I think he died around in the 1950s. The book was published in 1939, and that's to tell you how profound that book is, that we could still be discussing this notion of the miseducation of our children. The other interesting thing about this notion of the miseducation of our children and of our population is that recently, and the young people in our midst who are listening in, and I hope there's some young people, the interesting thing is that there was an album which blew off the charts. It won like the top in 2021. It was the first among the 100 best albums, etc. And what was that album called? It was called The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. And it was produced by a young African woman, Lauryn Hill. And when they asked her, what brought you to consider this name, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill? And she said, well, of course, the book, The Miseducation of the Negro, was one of them, of the things that led her in that direction, but also the education of Sonny Carson, because she says the other side of miseducation is what kind of education do you receive? And she talked of miseducation being a metaphor for being re-educated. in the sense that if you understand that you have been miseducated, that you've been taught things that are not leading you to progress and to achieve your full potential, then you have to admit that you've got to be re-educated. And I thought that was very interesting. I think she was in her 20s. I think she was 21 years old when she produced the album and was having this profound discussion about our miseducation and the re-education necessary to be able to achieve full potential. So here we are. Now, we have today a very interesting group of people who are going to be discussing this with me, and I'd like to introduce all of them. So let's see if we can get everyone in, starting with our elder brother, Equino Moyo. There he is. Elder Moyo, good afternoon and welcome.
Afternoon.
Right. And we have also discussing with us this afternoon, Sister Aina. Sister Aina, I hope you're there and able to join us. Yes. Sister Aina Olukoyode. I didn't see her, but she's with us. And as well, we have young Miss Dominique Quashe. Dominique, can we see you there?
Hi, good day, everyone.
Good day. Great, great. So we're going to have this very interesting discussion. We're talking about the African child, and I'm really, really proud that we have young Dominique Quashe with us, because that means we're engaging directly with the group of people who we are talking about. So we are going to begin this discussion with Elder Moyo. He's a teacher of many, many, many years. Actually, he is the principal of the Moyo School of Excellence that teaches predominantly mathematics and it makes sure that our young people are able to achieve their full potential where mathematics is concerned. So with that, I'm going to give the floor over to Elder Moyo and then proceed. Moyo, the floor is yours.
Okay. Pleasant afternoon to all. This afternoon, I have been asked to address the topic, the miseducation of the African child. I define miseducation as a system of instructions being taught to people of African descent to hate themselves, their roots, and their cultural heritage, and to view themselves in the image of the enslavers. That's my definition. As such, I want to begin with a quotation from Dr. Carter G. Woodson, same individual that our sister Asha spoke of earlier, the author of the book, The Miseducation of the Negro. And I want to quote, "When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not have to tell him not to stand here or go yonder. He will find his proper place and will stay in it. You do not need to send him to the back door. He will go without being told. In fact, if there is no back door, he will cut one for his special benefit. His education makes it necessary," unquote. That's the end of quote. Indeed, the enslavement of the African, our ancestors, in this hemisphere, the Americas and the Caribbean, has exposed the African man and his descendants to an education system that has made it necessary for them to do many negative, abnormal, unnatural, and self-defeating things. In this enslaved environment, The experience has been such that it has made it necessary for our ancestors and their descendants to be dependent on the European enslavers for guidance and leadership. In fact, to be a good product of enslavement, the psychological indoctrination of the enslaved was necessary then, as it is now and continues today. And this continues to maintain control over our people. The historian Kenneth Stamp, in his remarkable book, The Peculiar Institution, revealed information gathered from the manuals and other documents which were produced by slave owners on the subject of training the enslaved. Stamp notes 5 recurring aspects of this training that produce a perfect enslaved person. He cited 5 ways used in the process of the psychological indoctrination of the enslaved. 1, to accustom the enslaved to rigid discipline, thus demanding from the enslaved unconditional submission. 2, impress upon him a sense of his own innate inferiority, thus implanting in the bondsman a consciousness of personal inferiority, and this was deliberately extended to his past. 3, develop in him a paralyzing fear of the white man. 4, train the enslaved to adopt the enslaver's code of good behavior. In this case, the master criteria of what was good and true and beautiful were to be accepted unquestioningly by the enslaved. And 5, according to Stamp, the strategy was to impress the enslaved with their helplessness, thus instilling in him a sense of complete dependence. Now, when we look at these 5 points, you see them alive today among our people. As such, the miseducation has become institutionalized since they have been lived out. There may have been changes over time, changes in form, but the substance remains the same. Out of the soil of enslavement came the psychological desire for an education system that does not debase the African, but offer a new sense of manhood and a deep feeling of racial pride and an audacious appreciation of his heritage. In fact, Dr. Anthony T. Browder speaks to the issue of an appropriate education system when he wrote in his Browder's file, and I quote, "Education builds the mind, which builds nations," unquote. And he further stated, "If your education does not teach you to value the history and the culture of your ancestors, then it is of little value to you." End of quote. Now, the African conception of education before enslavement, this is before ancestors were placed into this bondage. was designed to acknowledge the divinity which each person and to teach our children how to manifest it in their life's work. Education was a rite of passage, which was the birthright of every person in our traditional African societies. Since the belief exists that ignorance was a sin, so our people had to be educated. And this was so even before we came into enslavement. This is why there have been rallying calls in so many countries worldwide for a breakaway from the unconditional submission instituted during enslavement and to assert our own selfhood, according to Dr. Martin Luther King. This model of human instruction was replicated throughout Africa in cultures from Kemet, which we all call Egypt in this modern world today, to Timbuktu, as well as others, south of Timbuktu. This sophisticated educational system trained the architects, the engineers, mathematicians, chemists, astronomers, artists, geologists, political and social scientists, priests, masons, carpenters, rulers, farmers. And in this contemporary world, we have to demand that it must be done again. If we are to save our children. Not that they are not being exposed to some form of education, but the education has always been one to serve others, where there was lack of pride sometimes in what we do. Undoubtedly, to address many of the modern day problems manifesting among our children, we have to properly educate our children. In this regard, all the parts involved in this process, all the stakeholders, parents, educators, policymakers, politicians, organizers, leaders, business owners, they are all responsible for the education of our children. And therefore, they have an important role to play. We have to teach them about the richness of their cultural heritage. And not that their African ancestry tainted them, and that their color was a badge of degradation. This was so from since enslavement time. And fundamentally, there are many people within our societies who still view their color as a badge of degradation. There's still a discussion about who is fairer than who and who is darker, and how one is treated, one against the other. We have to teach them to love themselves, to appreciate themselves, and to believe in themselves. For what is being displayed these days among our children, there's a lack of focus on the value system of our children. And we need to pay some attention to that. We have to instill positive life values that emphasize sincerity, trust, virtue, justice, pride, collectivity, self-determination, and generally a shared identity rooted in common heritage, language, values, experiences that bind us all together as a distinct and enjoying community. Peoplehood. In other words, we have to build character and emphasize the virtues of manners. The responsibility of all these values rests with all the stakeholders in our system, who have seen that their collective efforts are successfully undertaken and completed. All these stakeholders have to engage in a loving outreach to our children. Give them purposeful direction and extend that caring hand so that our children are no longer ashamed to be called African or to identify with their very own blackness. As such, identify with their African heritage. Indeed, to offset this cultural homicide, the African must rise up with an affirmation of his own. It must be a giant step, Olympian manhood, according to Dr. Martin Luther King. We all have to be involved. We have to save the children. We have to give them direction, give them a purpose in their life. However, as long as the mind is enslaved, the body can never be free. And therefore, the education must be such to address that mental problem, that psychological indoctrination that I spoke of earlier. So the psychological freedom and a firm sense of self-esteem must now be the most powerful weapon against this issue of miseducation of our children. And the long night of mental enslavement. Our school system has to be prepared for that task of treating with our children. If they don't, the misdirection and the miseducation of our children will continue. And we will continue to feel unsafe in their presence. So in this regard, I want to thank you for hearing the few words that I've had to say pertaining to the miseducation of our children and the call for all hands to be on deck. I thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much, Elder Moyo. Yes, we hear you. I think you've given us a few really strong points there for consideration. You're talking about the lack of self-esteem that our young people have. You speak to the cultural, the key components of their cultural values that they must be shared with them so that they feel that they embody these. And you really call for all stakeholders, all hands on deck. So like whole of society approach to be able to engage with our young people so that they can fulfill their potential and that they can take their rightful place within the society. So we thank you for those pointers, and we're going to discuss this in greater detail when we all get a chance to raise some questions here. So we thank you very much, and I want to move right on now to Aina Olukoyode. Sister Ina, I hope she's still with us. I think she's had a little trouble with her system, but there we are. There we are, Sister Aina. Right, sister, we're very, very happy to have you with us. And sister is the vice principal acting of a primary school in Trinidad and Tobago. And so she brings to this discussion that wealth of experience that one has to have to reach that position of vice principal acting, though it is, in the primary school system in Trinidad and Tobago. So, Mother Aina, we're very much like to hear your thoughts on this question of the miseducation of the African child. We'd like you to tell us, give us some insight. What is happening in the primary school system that causes so many of our children to seem to fall through that gap between leaving primary school and when they should be entering secondary school? There is a huge dropout rate, and apparent we don't have all the data. That's a big problem when you don't have the data before you. But what we gather is that a lot of more young men, and they're more African young men, we are told sometimes, but we don't have the data to swear by that. But certainly more young men are dropping out of the school system before they move on to the secondary school system. What is causing them to feel so disheartened in the primary school system that they feel they should end their experience in education altogether and find some other route? Can you give us any insight into that?
Good afternoon, everyone. In our tradition, we'll say at this time, Ekasa, because the sun is still up. It is really significant that our young Black men, our young Black boys, they are seeing our education system as irrelevant. That irrelevance is the root of their choice to drop out. And I dare say that some of them drop out before they even get to SE. They give up. One of the things that we are mindful of, as Elder Equino mentioned, is the rites of passage. And a rite of passage is supposed to give you that foundation and empowerment to move on to the next stage. And our primary education system is not doing it for some of our young people, especially our young men. There's a verse of Ifa. I will say it first in Yoruba and then give the translation. It says, Kama ti wara wara nkoru onku oro ohun aba if shaba. Kama if shebinu bi abade bi to tu. Ká wo wájú ọjọ́ lọ títí, ká túnbọ̀ wá rèhìn ọ̀ràn wọ̀, nítorí àti sún ara ẹni ni. And what does that say? Let us not rush the world hastily. Let us not grasp at the rope of wealth impatiently. Why? We are miseducating our children. We are rushing some of our children into primary school. They may not have had preschool. We are focusing on wealth creation for a few, but not character creation for all. What should be treated with mature judgment, let us not treat in a fit of rage. And the maturity with which our educators need to treat with the education of our children is not there for some of us. Some educators are still demeaning our children by mentioning the color of their skin, as Elder Equino spoke about, the colorism. These things are in our society, and despite the training given, and there's no formal training in cultural sensitivity given to teachers, you are guided to use appropriate content from the passage. Whenever we arrive at a cool place, let us rest sufficiently well. Our education system, our schools are not cool. Physically, some of them are just hot. Some of our infrastructure is not there. The maintenance of it is not responsive enough so that it may take an administrator a long time, meaning more than 2 terms, to get some things dealt with. There is a system put in place where you indicate what needs to be done, but due to the appropriation of resources, it may not happen immediately. And in the meantime, our students have to make do to get by. There's some situations where they may have to deal with pigeons, they may have to deal with sanitization, they may have to deal with things that may actually make them sick and therefore absent, or their teachers sick and therefore absent. Are our school buildings having the necessary infrastructure? And as we focus on boys learn differently to girls. So that if our school system, our system of education, does not cater for our boys, best practice for boys is best practice for all. Best practice that takes care of those with different abilities and all inclusive would be best practice for all. We need to give prolonged attention to what is necessary for the future of our children, not just to move on to pass SE, the academic things. We need to focus on the values, attitudes, behaviors, and skills that will make our education relevant, our education system relevant for young people in the future. So that's why I chose this African verse from Ethiopia. It's an Urdu. And the thing about it is that in our systems, as Elder Equino Moyo said, the rites of passage allows the parent, allows the key stakeholders in that child's life to know what they are about, what they will be proficient and efficient and effective and excelling. Yes, so how do we fix these situations? One, we need to focus on the training of our teachers. We need to focus on a general common value system in our communities and our society and our nation that we all must agree on. This is what we want our model citizen to be. Yes? And as those of us who are interested in our youth generally, and specifically our African youth or young African males, we have to ensure that there is the network. We have to understand, because of the historical situations, that as African people, the network that other cultures may have, we were deprived of. It was deliberate that that underpinning of spirituality and tradition or religion was removed. So that whereas other people, they get their blueprint from birth and they know it's culturally theirs, it is their blueprint, we get a blueprint that comes from another tradition that doesn't value us most of the time. We get a blueprint that comes from another tradition that doesn't see us as valuable. We have to understand that we are not preparing our children for us, we are preparing them for 7 generations. So that when you are productive, a young person must know that when you're productive, your society, your nation is depending on you. And you know that what the system that you are receiving is something that has been shown to be tested, tried, and true, so that there's the confidence to be comfortable in continuing with it. We keep our children in primary school from 5 to 12, and sometimes they have to stay longer because there isn't correct assessment of them and to address their challenges and deficiencies. And it's very disheartening to see teachers struggling. They want to help, but they may not know how to. And then the specific help for a child who may have learning challenges, it may not be there. So student support services need to be responsive so that you don't have a child referred from standard 1 and there is no assessment done until some children leave primary school and they never get the assessment. Why? They have to pay for the assessment. So when Keeler Francis speaks about access, cost of transportation to get to school, sometimes everybody doesn't have it. We have situations of that thing called period poverty, the cost of providing personal hygiene items for girls. So every month they have to stay home at a particular time. There is the issue of, dismantling those grand colonial narratives. It's a real thing. In addition to being in a hot school, sometimes you're in a hot uniform. And then when you start to wiggle and carry on and you're disruptive, then you're punished. It can get very tricky for a child to negotiate primary school. So, how do we re-educate? Who do we start re-educating with? We have to start our re-education with parents so that our parents have support. We have to do re-education of the teachers and principals so that we don't have anybody calling any child picky here, calling anybody blackie. We don't have children being stigmatized. The spoken word competition is one of great hope because when children learn of these grand achievements, yes, you see the self-esteem improve. So I really hope that with the cultural transformation initiative, that we have more meat in it, more things that are not left to the women fancy of teachers, more things that are not done superficially, but guidelines given and content given that empowers and boosts our children so that they understand our history and they understand why we are where we are and how we can improve to be where we need to be. The opportunity is there with our cultural transformation initiative that was started from 2023 and is supposed to go to 2027. But it needs to be more definitive, I would say. There's too much leeway. Yes, you can do something and you can do it superficially. Emancipation is never during the school term.
Yeah.
Yes, so it has some things need to be set and monitored closely.
Thank you so very, very much. Yeah. It's very refreshing, and I hear already some things that are overlapping between yourselves and Brother Equino, Elder Moyo. So I think we already have some things for discussion there. This issue of the self-esteem, the embedded cultural notions. I liked your mention that most come with a kind of a cultural blueprint, and their networks. But these young African children come without those networks and without those blueprints. And the blueprints that are being, let's say, foisted upon them in this learning environment are blueprints alien to them, but they're expected to just absorb them. This is a very interesting discussion here. And I think we have a lot of food for thought as we go on. I want to bring in now the one young person on this panel, and that is Miss Dominique Quashe. Dominique has been a former participant of the National African History Quiz program. And she's now, if I understand correctly, Dominique is entering her upper sixth.
No, so I recently graduated from upper six. So in September, starting Yeye. Yes.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. A university student. Wow.
Yes.
Power to this. Okay, Dominique, that's fantastic. So she's a recent graduate and has recently left upper sixth. So she's still very familiar. Her feet are still grounded in the experience of secondary school in Trinidad and Tobago. And she's willing to share what has been the content of her curriculum. What does she feel are the gaps? What are the weaknesses? So, Dominique, the floor is yours.
I'd like to begin with a quote which states, "A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots," said by Pan-Africanist Marcus Garvey, which I retrieved from my African History Quiz booklet of 2022. As previously stated, the feature discussion is the miseducation of the African child. From my perspective, this phrase refers to the suppression of African knowledge, culture, and history while promoting Western ideologies. This further portrays the words of the West as the most accurate form of history to be taught in educational institutions. So let's think about it. Think about it as a shift from colonizing lands to colonizing the educational system for the African child. Participating in the National African History Quiz in 2022 was definitely an eye-opener for me, as it exposed not only the day-to-day challenges which are faced by persons with African descent, but it is also exposing the amount of African history that has been a taboo, especially in the school's curriculum. For instance, I acquired knowledge about all of the unspoken achievements gained by singing Sandra, Pearl Eileen Primus, Dr. Kafra Kambon, James Edward West, intellectuals such as W.E.B. Du Bois, Kwame Nkrumah, Henry Sylvester Williams, and George Padmore, just to name a few. I learned about events such as the Grenadian Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, the Canboulay riots, and the Battle of Adwa. Despite being a history student for a total of 7 years in secondary school, some of these people and historical events would have been new to me, or I was exposed to it before covering the topics in Form 6. For example, I did not know so much about the Yoruba village that is situated in my country, even though Trinidad and Tobago history was covered in school, both primary and secondary. So it highlights how subjective history can really be. As captain of my team, I ensured to have group discussions with my teammates, and we found ourselves asking the same question. How is it we did not learn about this in school and it is basic Trinidadian history? Yet still, if you ask us something related to European history, we can definitely answer or recall doing it, whether it was in primary school or secondary. For instance, the name Christopher Columbus stains the minds of every school child throughout Trinidad and Tobago, along with his 3 ships and the year 1498. I use the word stain because this is the first bit of history we learn in great details at a very young age. It starts in primary school. On the other hand, if we mention other important names such as Toussaint Louverture or Jean-Jacques Dessalines, it may not even ring a bell. Which brings me to my other point. After investigating the current primary school curriculum, in my opinion, the topic of emancipation is taught as an overview. The lessons would have gone like, in 1838, African slaves from Africa were freed from slavery in the Caribbean by the Europeans. I find myself asking, what part of Africa? Africa is a big continent. At least 2 specific countries can be mentioned, while its European history is taught carefully and in great details. They do not leave it as Christopher Columbus arrived on 3 ships. They are specific, even about the specific European countries persons like him would have came from. Moreover, this prevents the African child from properly understanding their own history at a young age, and it fosters the miseducation, because if it's not taught in schools, they would never know. Think about it. If Eurocentric history is the only form of history that is taught carefully in the institutions, how will African children acquire any information, any knowledge about their own African roots? I have another question. How is it we only know about Haiti when speaking about natural disasters in geography? Haiti is usually the most common example when addressing that topic. At an early stage, why do we not know about Haiti being the first enslaved colony to successfully fight and achieve their independence in 1804, and the first Black republic in the Caribbean? Though it is taught in secondary schools to students who do decide to pursue history, I believe that such historical facts should be a part of the narrative of emancipation. And that is just one example. I would like to relay information on a situation that I actually came across. I was in lower 6 at that time. In my entire life, up until lower 6, of course, I learned about the Europeans, specifically Christopher Columbus, of course, making successful voyages to the Caribbean. However, I did not know that there were other theories, including Ivan van Sertima's theory, where his thesis states that the Africans actually made it to the Caribbean before Columbus. And you can read more about this in his book entitled They Came Before Columbus. And I was only exposed to this because I chose to pursue Form 6 history. What about the students who did not choose to go in this direction? Why is it not highlighted as much as European theories? Is it because Eurocentric history is perceived to be more accurate? Or is African history purposely omitted because it is African? What about the importance of Pan-Africanism and the champions associated with this topic? Luckily, my teammates and I, as well as other participating schools, had the opportunity to be exposed to such taboo topics, and for that, I am grateful. For my last point, I would like to highlight that the miseducation of the African child also relates to social issues outside of the classroom. And here is where I am going to ask a few questions for us to reflect. Before having knowledge about your African heritage, how do you feel as an African child? Do you constantly feel lost while trying to meet the beauty standards set by society? As I previously mentioned, anything African is a taboo or relating to something negative. For example, the term black market or dark web. African skin, typically darker skin, is regarded as ugly or not good enough. Should I feel ugly because my skin color is not light enough? My kinky hair, should I feel insecure about wearing it in its natural state? Why am I not allowed to wear certain Afrocentric styles? Why is it regarded as unprofessional? Touching even closer to home, I retrieved an article from the Newsday done by journalist Narissa Fraser. Students of Trinity College, Mocha, protested that hair rules must change as it is the 21st century. These students were not allowed to graduate in the main ceremony, meaning that they were not allowed to cross the stage in front of their supporting relatives and family. The school did not allow students who had natural groomed short cornrows in their hair to graduate. They stated that students must cut their hair. Now, cornrows, besides being a form of fashion, it is culturally tied to the African roots and identity. Why must one be forced to cut their hair to fit the norm? I'd give you a fun fact. If you Google unprofessional hair, you will realize that 9 out of 10 images are persons of Afro descent. How is it a person who does not know me already has a negative opinion formed about me? How am I already disliked without fully expressing myself, all because I am African? As a young African, male or female, how do I even know who I am? Such issues should not be a taboo or even normalized. It dates back to the establishment of social pyramids created by persons of a lighter skin during chattel slavery, to rarely seeing your African skin color in popular magazines such as Vogue or Cosmopolitan, and well, presently, social media. To combat this issue, meetings with school curriculum officers and even the Minister of Education should occur to introduce a more Afrocentric curriculum without the influence of Eurocentric textbooks and authors. Another solution, which is utilized by St. Joseph's Convent San Fernando, is the establishment of cultural clubs. I was an active member, then later president of the African Cultural Club. In this club, students are educated about the entire African continent, from culture to language to historical facts about the individual countries throughout Africa. Lastly, the final solution is one of which is offered by the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. They continuously have the African History Quiz, as every year, new bits of African history is provided within the booklet for all participants. These participants now have the opportunity to engage in educational conversation with their peers, where there will be a transfer of new information between the youths. I quote my teammate, Khalida Warwood. every page that was discovered in that booklet was a new form of information being acquired by us. It is safe to say that this quiz has expanded our African knowledge. As I end, I would like to leave you with a quote which was taken from an African proverb. It states, "Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter." Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dominique. Oh man, that was very exciting and interesting, and really gave us nothing like youthful energy to put us on the path of where we should be. So thank you very, very much, and definitely, we've got to end the hunter story, and allow the other stories to flourish, and that's what we're talking about today. I wanted to just raise one. Dominique makes me think when we were listening to Professor Lewis Gordon on the Sunday at the launch. He made the point that the issue of the book by Fanon, Black Skins, White Masks. In reference to that book, he said the essence of that book is that it speaks to two lies. One of the lie is the superiority of the white skin, and the other lie is the inferiority of black skin. And we are taught those two lies, and people live by it. And he was giving the example, which was such a wonderful example because it's so easy to see. He said, the amount of violence that has been committed by white people over the many 500 years. We talk about the genocides being committed against the indigenous people. We talk about enslavement. We talk about the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And yet, when you say to people, how do they feel about living under different groups of people? They express, how shall I put it? They express fear of living under blacks and joy at possibly feeling that they will be safer somehow by living under whites. So we have we need to wash our brains, as they say, because we have to take Laurel Hill's argument that miseducation has resulted in us having to re-educate ourselves if we're going to have growth and development, and if we're going to be able to fulfill our potential. Now, let's see how we're doing with time. So there's some burning issues that I think people will want addressed. And I really want to thank everyone for their inputs. I think it has set us off on a good point for discussion. Now, one of the things that has come to light, and this just came, I think there's an article in today's newspaper, actually, because this issue came up about 2 or 3 days ago, so it might hit you like a shock, as it did me. It speaks about the issue of the suspension of our children from the school system. And this article notes that the alarming number of 21,661 students, let's just say over 21,000 students were suspended over the last 3 years. Now, already we recognize that the education system, the curriculum is not up to standard to meet the needs of African children, either because of the way in which it's delivered by people, maybe many of them who look just like us, who are filled with all the negative thoughts about who we are and what our culture is and all the inferior things about us. So when they deliver that curriculum, it does us more harm than good. So despite all of that, and in the middle of all of that, some 21,000 children have lost the opportunity for participating in that education system. Now, I hear the figures, but I see no evidence. And so I have a bunch of questions like Dominique. I'm just full with questions. I want to know, who are these children? What ethnic backgrounds did they come from? Right. What areas of the country What schools were they in attendance? You know, I want to know what is the average length of time that
of
they suffered this
suspension.
suspension. Is the average length 2 days, or is the average length 3 weeks, or is it a month or two? What are we talking about when we are talking about over 21,000 children being denied their education? And if you remember at the beginning of the program, we said that there were two things about ridding ourselves or of this miseducation. One, of course, is access to it, to education as a whole, and the second being the dismantling of that Eurocentric hegemony that exists in the education, which is taught to us over and over again. And now we're hearing about this large number of young people that were suspended. We don't know, as I said, what the data suggests. The other question I have is we don't know what's the nature of the transgression. What were they suspended for? Is it like Dominique said, maybe because their hair were in cane row? Is it because of their hairstyle? What is the norm? What is the norm for suspension? And then the fundamental question that bothers me is, what are these young people doing when they are suspended? Because we hear so much about this youth crime wave where young people are somehow finding themselves in dysfunctional behaviors. And now we are hearing such a large number of them, 21,000 over, were suspended over a 3-year period. But we've got to, what's the word? We've got to deconstruct those numbers so that we can find out if, in fact, it's our children that are in the main being suspended and what's happening to them. We cannot, that's something that I would hope we can all, and that's something people at home can do by asking, even within their own schools. They can say, how many children have been suspended from our school, the school that my child attends, and for what reasons and how long? So if we start asking for the information as parents within the school system, we may be able to influence what's happening in that school system. But the other very important thing that I hear having come out of this discussion is the challenge that the children are facing because of maybe the inadequate training of the teachers themselves. So the question is, and this I'm going to open as questions for my three panelists here. Anybody can talk on it. I'm interested to know if they've come upon any programs for teachers that deal with intergenerational trauma. How do children, how do we, are the teachers aware of what is being described as intergenerational trauma, which means that even if you had no trauma in your life, even if you could say, oh, I've had a good life. I mean, I've not lost any parents or, even my grannies and so on. I haven't lost them in any horrific way. But if past trauma, and the psychologists are now agreeing that past trauma, for instance, the enslavement of our people and all of the traumas associated with that over time, actually, we feel those traumas within us and we respond to it. And are we addressing any intergenerational trauma within the school system? The other kind of things that I wonder, as I heard Sister Mother Iya, speaking about, was whether or not the period poverty, whether or not young people actually had the wherewithal and their families to support them in everything that is necessary to make education fulfilling. Do they have the resources? So I asked the question about deprivation. Are we dealing with young people who, in some instances, may not have the resources to be able to meet the needs, whether it is food? I mean, we'd like to think that everybody has 3 meals a day, but we know that's not true. There is some hunger, the violence that takes place at home or in the communities, and the loneliness. We don't even think of that, but there are children suffering loneliness. Some have had to have parents go abroad to work. And, long ago, a few years ago, we were talking about the barrel children. because mother had to go abroad to work. And so she was sending things home in barrels, and that's how children were surviving and so on. So are those social phenomena, are they being taken on board in the education processes for our children? So I'd like to hear from anybody how they feel about the social processes that are taking place, and is the school or are the teachers equipped to be able to address those social processes?
Well, there's certainly a lot to unpack, but I'll start where you ended. Ear. Ear means mother.
I know.
So
So you can say mother has. I take that. I have plenty children.
yes, so one of the things at schools, we have student support services. We have the support with grants for children who there's a means test. When we find that there are children who may be showing signs of neglect or deprivation, we do the referrals. There may be further investigations done by social services, and they may be recommended to get grants and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So there are systems in place that try to address those things.
Mm-hmm.
There are systems in place with regards to in discipline. There's a discipline matrix. So when you hear, I'm sorry to shock you further, when you hear about over 21,000 suspensions,
Mm-hmm.
there are there would be probably twice that
Mm-hmm.
of children on record who would be there's a process that you go through for
Yes.
indiscipline. So when you get to suspension, it means that is the last resort.
Mm-hmm.
Things should have been tried. Let me say that.
Yes.
Things should have been tried
Mm-hmm.
before.
Mm-hmm.
The issue of, so it comes to parenting and your network. And then when we speak about teacher training, meals are provided. And
Yes.
after
Right.
34 years,
Mm-hmm.
I know that there are children who only come to school when their meals, from the time meals stop, like this week is the last week here for meals, from next week they're not coming to
With
school.
absence.
Mm-hmm.
Yes? And if they can get extras to take home, they're taken home. Because when they leave school, the next hot meal will be when they come to school, lunchtime.
Mm-hmm.
Breakfast is rarely a hot meal,
Mm-hmm.
right? If they're on the breakfast list. So it's really critical. And the situation with regards to the grants
Mm-hmm.
means that there's some situations where it's not being properly managed. So again, parenting, we need to have, independent of the government and the Ministry of Education and so on, independent of that, civil society has to ensure that we have enough parenting programs. And there are parenting programs, Families in Action, and we have to keep at it, because that intergenerational trauma is real, that
It's
Dr.
real.
Joy DeGruy speaks about. It
Mm-hmm.
is a real thing,
Mm-hmm.
so that instead of being hopeless, we have to find a way to support
Mm-hmm.
and give hope to our children, which is
Absolutely.
why
Absolutely.
as it was a joy to listen to Dominique speak.
Mm-hmm.
And you could tell that sixth form rigor going there, quotes all
Yes.
the
Yes.
way. Yeah. Um, yes,
Yes.
well done,
Yes.
Dominique.
Thank you
Thank
And
very
you.
there's
much,
so many
Dominique.
more of our children who are excelling. So we have to
Mm-hmm.
give kudos to Emancipation Support Committee to
Yes.
keep highlighting
Mm-hmm.
the positives in our
That's right.
children, and
That's right.
as well in exposing them to this good history.
That's right. That's right. That's
We need
excellent.
to have more injections of that good history
Mm-hmm.
through, as I said,
Mm-hmm.
definitive ways
Yes.
on our
Yes.
curriculum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think Elder Moyo made that, called for that in a sense. He said we've got to do something to ensure that these young people are exposed to ideas about themselves that are positive, and
That's
really
right.
that is the kid, that is the critical thing. Otherwise, we will lose them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to add
Dominique?
to, I just want to add in like a
Mhm.
question, another question. My biggest concern is, but do these children feel comfortable sharing their wants and needs for the fear of criticism and neglect? That is very important to consider.
Mhm.
Yes,
Mhm.
it is, because there are many stories of stigmatization. You're
Exactly.
Mhm.
struggling to
Exactly.
come to school and you're coming to school with your hole in your shoe, and
Yeah.
then you're being bullied.
Mhm.
Yes.
Absolutely. I
And
think
and the
yeah.
worst is if I read a note on a teacher's page. What happens? We talk about bullying from children. What happens if the principal is the bully? What happens if the teacher is the bully?
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes. And that's it leads me to my other point. If I am reporting an issue, I'm constantly reporting an issue and nothing is being done. What sense does it make that I report yet another issue if I know there's nothing that will be done to help me,
Mhm.
to assist other
Yes,
children?
Mhm.
yes.
Mhm.
That
So,
hopelessness
yeah,
is a real thing.
Yeah, I think we have to urge, we have to call more for it, and we have to urge that there is better training. I know that, for instance, the example is in Canada is that all teachers must be provided with training in cultural competency. That's what they call it. They no longer call it cultural sensitivity. They talk about competency in the sense that you must be able to understand the different cultures in your environment and have deep respect and so on for those cultures. You have to be able to demonstrate that. Uh, we think for some reason that we don't have to do that with our teachers. And yet I think I heard it in out of three of you, this issue of colorism, the issue of children who are darker being shunted aside. And their actual students have done their doctoral thesis in Trinidad and Tobago for in education, discussing the fact that the darker children are pushed to the back of the classroom. They're not being
Yes,
asked questions. They're not being allowed to engage and respond to questions and so on. So this is serious, and therefore it
yes, it
means
is.
that within the system itself, because I think as challenging as it is, we've got to challenge the education system to address the needs of our children. Because although I absolutely agree that civil society and parents have to do all that they can do, the system is where the education takes place of the majority of our children. And therefore, that system must meet the needs of our children. We must ensure that it meets the needs of our children and does so correctly. So that is one of the things I would like to suggest. Now, I heard it also mentioned about parents. And Sister Mother Aina, you made the point that we've got to do more with the parents to help them understand these issues of intergenerational trauma. How do we've got to do much more work with our African parents. I don't know, Brother Elder Moyo, if you, if, how do you see that? Where do you think this is going? Can we, in fact, get more assistance from the elders, the parents?
The home is the first place our children are exposed to any form of education.
yes.
The home. And if the parents in the home are ill equipped to give proper direction, it becomes a problem. I am seeing, and this is where this whole process of we not following some of the traditional institutions to build the strength of the individual so that when they become a parent, the strength and knowledge gained through that process, and which we call the rites of passage, where we build character, we build, give them a sense of values, we build manners, right? So we give them something on a solid foundation on which to treat with their very homes. If that is lacking, we're going to have a problem. The point here is that there are many homes because of our experience as a people that are dysfunctional in a serious way.
Mm-hmm.
There are many homes. And if we do not put a handle on it, others will put a handle on it for us.
Correct.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And there will be serious misdirection to those individuals. This is why children coming from such homes are praised to be used by those who, for whether it's ill-gotten gains or what have you, who get involved in the get-rich-quick syndrome,
Yes.
whatever activities there. I was listening to a program a little earlier today. I think it's with Kat Sinclair.
Sinclair.
Yes.
Yes, but
Yes.
that's Sinclair.
Eyes on dependency.
Eyes on dependency,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
And how easy it is that our children can be trapped into some situations. Because we have to realize that we are living in a society that a lot of it is driven by the underworld. We cannot escape that. That's a fact. Right? And Darius Figueroa, who is one of the specialists in that area, he spoke about it. And I am saying that we have to be concerned that if a proper job is not done to give the African family, the African man and woman, the proper sense of values, they are going to end up in serious problems because they're going to be grabbed by those who can use them with relative ease. So I have been able to interface with many parents who have shown great concern for the state of their children, who they associate with, who they go out with, right? Who they interface with on a daily basis, how that helps in their child's development. And many of them are concerned. So the point is something has to be done to strengthen the cultural background of our people.
Can I ask this question? Because I think there's an agreement here.
Hmm.
How do we make that part of the institution of education? Or is it just that where people go to religious schools, that particular religion fosters what they perceive to be the values that this society should have? How is it that we are unable to have in government schools non-religious training, but respect for culture and people getting a deeper sense of
Jesus
understanding
Christ.
of their history and culture? How is that not possible?
Sister,
Hello?
Aina, right? spoke about it. The question of networking is one area that we sometimes fail to treat with, right, with some intensity, so that we can share knowledge and experience with each other, learn from each other's misfortunes and good
Sorry
fortune.
about that.
That's okay.
One,
That's okay.
I was
hear
hearing you.
just raise something that someone has just sent a message on, and they are saying that one of the things we should encourage is the life skills training. A lot of work has been done in developing those life skills training and the psychosocial intervention that is available. There's a curriculum, there's training, a text that for teachers, and we should encourage that those things are used and implemented in the school system. And that comes from the Sister Saran Prevat, who's actually produced the book and has done a lot of work in that regard. So I think we should, that is one of the recommendations she's making.
Yeah, because sometimes we definitely need to train others to teach others.
That's right. And one of the things that is necessary, when we see our children struggling, we need to make it mandatory that the parents, the environment that that child goes home to, it must be affected, because the intergenerational trauma comes from somewhere. The child is the manifestation of that. So the parents, it must be more than just a one-off visit. It must be that program must be something that is rolled out to these parents.
Right.
In addition to that, we need to make it clear when teachers, as you said, cultural competence is important. We cannot have children going to government schools, especially, and whether it's a government school or it is a denominational school. Once you have children of our nation going to that school, we need to know about each other.
That's right.
It must be more than just superficial.
Absolutely.
It must be more than superficial.
That's right. So otherwise, that's how we develop negative views of each other if we don't know.
That's right.
If we don't know.
The history we can understand, while with a curriculum developed for colonialism, why history wouldn't be taught. Because if you're educated and you're empowered, you will not want to maintain those structures.
Yes.
But education is the challenge would be for colonial mindset. How are we going to educate these people to be independent of us, empowered, and then not be revolutionary and violent? How are we going to do that? So that listening to the lecture with Dr. Gordon and the issue of, is that where he was talking about the issue of violence? Not that he's advocating violence, but revolution by its nature against colonialism is a violent situation.
Yes.
So with programs,
it's disruptive, and we need to disrupt, or think of
we need to disrupt
like disruptive. We need to disrupt that colonial system of education and ensure that we introduce. Because Dominique, you are receiving so much praise from the internet. People are just heaping praises on you, which is positive. Because in essence, you participated in that process, which has disrupted the education that you had received, and you now have this flourishing knowledge that allows you to fulfill your potential. And for that, we are, overjoyed. Now, time is running out. Yes. So I'm going to give everybody, starting with Dominique, one moment to give us maybe your last thoughts or your advice to say your own peers, Dominique. What do you advise them to do? And let's see if we can each just take 1 minute to do that so that we can bring the evening to a close in an orderly manner. Dominique, the floor is yours.
So, in my opinion, to students who are older than me or even younger, I believe that it is vital for you to educate yourselves, whether it is within the classroom or outside of the classroom. We have libraries, we have internet, we have social media. We are to use these resources to our advantage and educate ourselves. Because it is easy for us to be led astray. It is easy for us to to be victims of all of these issues that were mentioned this evening. So my advice, acquire as much knowledge, especially about your ethnic background, especially about your African roots. Because when people come to speak to you about it, you will already have knowledge about that topic, and you will be able to catch people when they are trying to mislead you, when they are wrong, when they are trying to colonize your knowledge.
Mhm.
So, to all my youths, to everyone, it is important to educate yourself.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much, Dominique.
No problem.
Iya, Aina, do you have a
Yes.
last word for
Well,
us?
I am really proud of Dominique because she said exactly, trust and believe. In our tradition, we have a saying, when you're initiated, you have to initiate yourself. So when
Mhm.
you are sent to school to be taught or to be trained, you now have to go and re-educate yourself.
That's
And
right.
that process means that all our network, our civil society, in our community centers, in our shrines, in our churches, we have to embrace the idea, the fact that African people are people of value, or people with attitudes and behaviors to be imitated, to be um, not to imitate colonialism, as
Mhm.
Fanon would have said.
Mhm.
Don't become
Really?
independent to imitate colonialism.
Yes.
Be independent to find your roots and to find the
Mhm.
best value of your true self, and then propagate that.
Yes. Okay.
There is information, and I
Mhm.
trust and believe that we need to have around two to,
Yes.
to focus
So
to
much to be
focus
said.
on
So much
the
to be said. Yes.
yes,
Yes.
there's much to be said, to
So,
focus on the solutions, to
that's
focus on the
right.
healing and the hope.
That's
That
right.
is a
Okay,
program that
Elder
we
Moyo.
yes that we have done.
Yes. Yes.
My
Moyo,
sister,
what advice would you like to give before we close?
we have to enrich ourselves by communicating frequently, one
Mhm.
community with another. And this is where the networking comes into focus, so that we can share the strength of our ancestors. There are great lessons, there are great values, there are great systems that we have had in the past.
Mhm.
We need to rekindle, restore,
Mhm.
bring into focus once again those values, those systems, so that we can help shape and build strong families who will be able to give proper direction to their children.
Yes.
Have
Mhm.
schools where the teachers are well informed,
Mhm.
so that they themselves can have an eye. In other words, we bring to life, it takes the village.
To raise a
Raise
child.
a child. Hi, Brother Moyo. Thank you so much, Elder. Thank you so much. I'm just going to close with two things. One is just that I'd like us to all send positive thoughts to a young sister, Attila, and to our elder sister, Mother Aintu. They have lost a dear, dear companion and soul, and that is Brother Abdul Malik. Delano Decoto, known as the bad poet from the 1970s. He's the one who initiated a lot of the spoken word that everyone has been engaged in
Yeah.
since then. We lost him. He made his transition yesterday, I think
My
yesterday.
condolences.
Yes, so please let us
Yeah.
all keep Sister Intu and young Tilla and her sister Dara all in mind um, as they go through this moment of loss. And now, just to wind up our day, which has been very exciting, and I can't thank you all enough for your own spirits and the knowledge and the wisdom and that you shared. And I'm just going to end with some words from Carter G. Woodson. He said, education should be a tool for empowerment, enabling individuals to understand their history, challenge injustice, and contribute to the betterment of their society. With that,
Ashe.
Ashe. Good evening and thank you all. and thank everyone who's participated, both here and abroad. Thank you again.
Thank you for the
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.